Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Building a Digital Underground Baseline, part of ConnectMe's Asset Mapping Events, Mapping the Hidden City series. I'm Greg Babinski. I'm a ERISA past president, American Geographical Society Ethical Geo Fellow, and the founder of GIS Management Consulting Services and the GIS Management Academy, located in beautiful Edmonds, Washington, just north of Seattle. I'll be moderating the event and hosting the Q&A later in the presentation. Before we get started, we'd like to run a quick poll of the audience to find out where you are from and what industries and sectors you work in. The poll, I think, has popped up already on your screen, so please be sure to fill it in and then hit submit at the end. Now, we'd like to have an interactive event today, so please enter your questions in the Q&A space located on the bottom navigation bar of your screen. There's no need to raise your hand, just post all questions in the Q&A space. Presenters will respond to all questions at the end of the presentation in a panel discussion session. Also, please be sure to participate in any additional audience polls as they pop up. For information about speakers for the event and for the event agenda, click the Resources tab at the bottom of your screen. We have also shared some useful links in the Resources section, which you can click to access anytime. Now, the session is being recorded and will be available for download on demand after the event. You'll receive an email notifying you when the recording is available. We'd like to thank our webinar series sponsors, M4M Analytics, for making this educational opportunity available to you. Today's featured speakers are myself and Joe Eberly, President and Chief Growth Officer for 4M Analytics, and Ed Chappell, Vice President Strategy Technology for WSB. I'll let each of them introduce themselves in more in-depth when they present. And then later, we'll also be having a 4M product demo from Maximilian Ovet, Public Sector Solution Engineer from 4M Analytics. A little bit of background on this session. Agencies inherit inconsistent maps and undocumented utility changes that undermine confidence during planning and construction. Without a clear understanding of underground conditions, risk increases, and coordination becomes reactive rather than proactive. In this session, we'll help you start with what you have and understand what you don't. The session introduces foundational concepts behind utility mapping and underground data confidence. It explores how agencies assess existing records, identify gaps, and prioritize additional information where risk and impact are highest. Participants will learn how records, field observations, and utility owner inputs are commonly organized using GIS and shared data environments to support coordination, versioning, and decision-making over time. These sessions, the session also frames ROI, return on investment, in practical terms such as reduced uncertainty, improved coordination, and fewer surprises during project delivery. Hopefully, you'll learn how agencies assess underground data confidence, ways to prioritize corridors and projects by risk, how shared environments support trust and coordination, and how cities think about ROI from improved underground awareness. So just before we get started with today's presentation, let's take a look at those poll results. I'm going to put my glasses on here. So, number one, what's your organization type? We've got over half of you from local government, a smattering from state, federal, academia, almost a third from industry, and some others. So, where are you located? Uh, yeah, basically United States, Canada. It's great. We have some people from South or Central America and Europe. Um, Excellent. And um, your business sector. So we have some from the land public administration planning, interestingly, a lot from transportation, public works, a few people from public information, emergency public safety, economic development, and some others. And your municipality size, last question, 30% under 25,000, a few 25 to 50, some 50 to 100,000. And, the plurality is from jurisdictions over 100,000 people. So great. With that, let me introduce our speakers today, or let me turn it over to our speakers today.
Well, maybe I'll get started if it's all right. Greg, thanks for hosting us today. It's a privilege to take part in the webinar. And first, let me thank my co-presenter, Ed. Thanks for jumping on the webinar together. What I'd like to do is maybe give you just 30 seconds about myself. So I'm the president and chief growth officer here at 4M Analytics. We're on a bit of an unusual mission in the industry, and that is to provide instantly available maps as part of sort of infrastructure and planning exercises that are going on across the country. And we want to do that and make that available in every state. That's above ground and below ground utility infrastructure made available with a push of a button. So that's a little bit about what I'm here to do. Background wise, I've spent about 30 years in construction technology, been with 4M going on 4 years now, and happy to be here. Ed, maybe I'll turn it over to you for an introduction.
Sure. Thanks. Nice to be here with you and Greg. Ed Chappell. So I'm Vice President of Strategy and Technology at WSB, design engineering firm headquartered in Minnesota. Do work in multiple states today. I spent more than a decade at Trimble, so also have a good background like you, Joe, in construction technology. Spent half my career with civil contractors and then the other half with DOTs, public works, airports, and other infrastructure owners. So excited to chat today.
Yeah, great. I think what I'll do, if it's okay, is I've got a few slides prepared that I'm going to walk through, and then maybe I'll turn it back over to you, Ed, to do the same. So let me show my screen here, and you guys tell me if you can see where I'm at here. Alrighty. Again, thanks everybody for joining. What I want to try to do today with everybody is go on a bit of a journey, a look ahead to what is happening in the industry and maybe what we'll begin to see, let's say, over the next 5 years. As everybody is probably aware, artificial intelligence is sort of transforming lots of industries, but also the utility space as well, specifically about how we gain access to high quality, comprehensive utility maps in a fast, efficient, and cost effective way. But it's also fundamentally changing the approach to what is the origin of some of the challenges that we as an industry face today in the damage prevention side of the house. So it's really my mission to ensure that everybody here and everybody that is participating can be best positioned to benefit from the changes that are happening as a result of the implementation of AI. So let me take us back for a second and let me know if the screen is changing here. Let's see. Is the screen changing there for you guys?
No, still on the same map and plan sheet.
All right, let's see.
Lighter bar.
There we go.
There you go.
So let me take us back to what is essentially the basic problem and challenge that everybody faces in the industry. Every 62 seconds, someone hits a buried utility line. We always sort of have to ask, why does that happen? And there's a number of reasons for that. According to the Common Ground Alliance in 2024, there were about 230,000 or so utility strikes that occurred. And about 50% of the excavators who were out on site trying to do the work, get into the ground where they needed to, those locations, unfortunately, were not located in the time frame that they needed to be. So there's a fundamental challenge around establishing what 4M is attempting to do, and some other folks as well, and that is create this baseline mapping capability that gives people a head start, and starts to bring together what we call sort of that early phasing of a project and the damage prevention efforts that are happening out there in the industry. So the current system, as we know it today, just simply is not sufficient, and in our view, it needs to evolve. It's no longer viable sort of to begin damage prevention just at the breaking of the ground, as I was describing a second ago. It needs to be earlier. It needs to be a part of the initial planning, the initial discovery, the initial estimating on the projects. And by doing so, what we're going to begin to see is a reduction in the damages that happen out there on site when our excavators start to get into the ground. So utility mapping today, as we all know, consists of trucks, boots, and locating devices, which is sufficient in a lot of cases for the work that needs to be done. But there's holes, there's gaps, there's challenges out there with this, not to mention the fact that in today's world, at the scale and pace of infrastructure development, it's having trouble keeping up. Manpower is an issue. Getting quality folks to participate in the activities that happen out in the field is a challenge, at least to all the organizations that I talk to. So the problem is simple, but the consequences are really devastating. And with the advancement of new AI technologies, some of the things that we believe that the technology can deliver are a reduction in accidental damages that happen out there because of the data is made available. Planning errors as a part of the early planning and design process can be reduced. Construction delays, challenges with asset management, and a whole host of other areas where we think the application of AI can begin to make an impact on the industry. So this is a sort of a interesting picture what happens out there on the project site. So everybody's involved, right? We've got multiple stakeholders, multiple players that are involved as a part of the infrastructure development process, including the project owners, the folks who are providing the funding. Oftentimes that's a DOT at the state level, the oversight agencies. You might have 6 to 10 individual utilities, public and private, that are out there on a particular site. Maybe 10 to 15 different engineering consultants might be pursuing this work, might be participating and developing plans for this work. Then, of course, you get out into the field and all the construction partners associated with it. There is insurance agencies that surely have an interest in risk mitigation and the utility mapping component of that as well. So we are trying to, at 4M, we're trying to find the right technology or develop the right technology, apply it to the projects that are out there, the infrastructure planning, and then again, give that access to all of the stakeholders that are involved along the way. Lastly, here's where we're at today. We are heavily involved in the planning, preliminary engineering, environmental engineering phases, but long-term, the impact of AI is going to go well beyond this. It's going to make its way out in the field. It's going to make its way into the asset management side of the house. So that's a quick overview of kind of what we're doing here at 4M and where the focus of a lot of the efforts that we're bringing to the table as an AI first company here. So Ed, let me turn it over to you. You can take it away from there.
Great examples, Joe. Thank you for the intro. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. I've got a few visual examples to share with everybody. Let me get those going. Make sure you can see these. Let me know when that looks good.
We can see it.
See it? Great.
Yeah.
So just a couple examples, right? The way that WSB and our teams have been helping both infrastructure owners as well as project teams and civil contractors is we start with, right, the 4M utility map information. As Joe said, it's great when we can get an early start, pre-construction, right, early design, right, before we get to say 30%. If you're DOT, right, or Public Works, the earlier the better, because one of the advantages that we've seen in terms of using 4M data is that it helps us rapidly get ready for both a design review and a constructability review. And a lot of what our focus is today is making sure that, let's say, existing assets like the utility networks don't have major, right, conflicts, clashes with the design. It also means, right, we have to look at design alternatives, right? And the more time we're given to look at design alternatives, for example, the better outcome you're going to have with a project, right? You're going to avoid costly delays when you get into construction. So a couple, good examples in terms of visually here. This is what we call our Inner Katy project. It's a project in Houston. You can actually see, right, what WSB does today is we take the 2D utility maps from 4M, and we'll typically apply a public owner's standards for utility networks, right, or the utility owners themselves. So diameters, right, different types, right, of materials and standards can be applied to them. And on this particular project, right, we spent a couple months building out, right, a 3D environment, right, that included the utility map information from 4M. You can see some of the design for this roadway as well. We also include 811, right, and field locate data, so you can see all of it, right, in a single environment. That helps you validate, right, your maps, where your gaps are, as Joe said, where you may have, right, missing information. But right away, right, even in this image, you can see we have a potential conflict, right, with some underground assets and part of the, right, proposed design, which you can see there in the middle. If you look at that particular utility, right, we do a lot of cross-sectioning, right, for the project teams. So this is just a view of how we can cut cross sections, right, that include both the utility map information, design information, locates, right, or field survey and inspection data. This really helps also with dealing with RFI and submittals in the field when your project team all have access and visibility into all of the data like this. It really makes resolving field, right, questions or issues, right, conflicts much faster, right? And on this particular project, we had several hundred RFIs, right, and submittals to deal with. And it went pretty fast, actually faster than this owner had done in the past, mostly because everybody is working from, right, a single data set that was very good, right, to use visually, right? You don't need to be an expert to be able to view, right, and look at conflicts as an example, or look at potential issues with the utility, right, move or plan with the design. So here's another cross section, right? It's just a different example of how we're able to cut those cross sections, look at that design information, right, against the existing utilities or even proposed utilities. One of the other big advantages we see with using 4M data is for our civil contractors, we actually integrate their schedule and their phasing of work. So we can actually provide a much better view of, hey, here's how the actual work, whether you're talking about, right, utility moves, work on the roadway. Contractors like to look at that based on a phase or schedule. It does impact how they're going to attack quantities, for example, and pay items with the owner. So it just gives them much better information, right, pre-construction, so that they have lower risks, can, right, address, right, project budgets and schedules, right, accurately. This has been a big help, right? And most of the civil contractors we work with would tell you this is great information, right? They'd love to see it on every project that they do, right, with owners. And I've got one kind of example. This was a very large project, right, that we did in Houston. So this is actually a screenshot of the mapping, the original mapping data we pulled from 4M. So you can see it was a very large road section that we were looking at today. And then I've got kind of a last slide with an interesting video that I wanted to show everybody. This is another project. This is actually in Dallas. So I think one of the advantages of using 4M that we've seen is that by getting that first project under our belt in Houston, right, which took us a couple months to put the data together, using APIs and some of the newer technology that 4M provides, we were actually able to model all of the utilities on this project, which is larger than the Houston project, And that was done in a matter of weeks instead of months. So we actually cut way down on the right time it took to prep the information, model it in 3D, model it to this particular owner's standard sizes, right, diameters, et cetera. And so we had better data sooner in the early design phase. Just gave us a lot more time to look at potential conflicts, right, and how we're going to deal with the corridor and right of way. We had some tricky spots. This one that we're looking at right here is a fun one where you've got a railroad coming through. You've also got that red brick building, happens to be a historic building, right, that we weren't aware of until we actually modeled everything out. So those constrain, right, your options when you're looking at, right, what you're going to do with your design and your utilities. This was great to have early on. It saved us a ton of time, right, and cost avoidance, risk avoidance later in the project. They also had a massive storm sewer, about 120-inch diameter storm on this project. We really had to look at that. Right? You can kind of see that they're showing it right now in that thing. It actually had some conflicts with some of the pilings that we were looking at from a design perspective. Catching that early allowed us, right, to help both the design team and the owner, right, look at a design alternative, right, to address that potential conflict. So really valuable information, right? We've seen a tremendous improvement in our field users, right? So they love to be able to view the data this way as well. It just helps them, right, with more real world analysis of how are they actually going to deal with, right, moving the utilities, constructing the design, right, against those utilities, right? So there's a lot of value here in terms of, right, both for the owner and the contractors. And in fact, as we start to do more road projects, right, we propose 4M, right, on most of our projects today in most of our states, whether you're a DOT or a public works agency, it's really going to bring a lot of value, right? And this is just, for instance, design and construction, right? I would argue that really the value of 4M is thinking about how am I going to use it in planning, right? And then how is it going to help me in my maintenance and asset management operations as well? And part of going through a project is we can actually provide updates to the 4M utility maps based on, right, field locates 811. So you get even better as-builts, right, going into your maintenance and asset management phases. So lots of great opportunity here for you as an owner to look at this information. And I can tell you our contractor community is very happy, right, to get this level of data because they haven't seen it before in the past. So really good, right? Works well if you're a public agency, you've got good GIS data on your utilities. Think about it as layers of information, right? 4M is providing a great utility map layer, and then you can add layers of data, whether it's locates, 811, other GIS layers of your utility information comes together really nicely. In fact, we tend to, right, bring those things together, for instance, in an Esri, right, environment and just have multiple layers. So I can look at them all at once, or I can jump to each layer, right, and look at those different details. So lots of value here, right? We're actually developing some great metrics from this project that we'll be presenting to several folks in Texas later this year. So we're looking forward to it. I've got other great examples, right? So if there's any interest in seeing other examples, right, we're always happy to show how we're using 4M in different types of projects with different owners. So
Ed, thanks for sharing with us those examples. Those are really strong testimony, right? I think to the power of what we're really talking about, right? Which is establishing an early baseline data set that can be used as a part of those initial phases. And as you can see, they help us identify, for on your examples, conflicts and design challenges where changes can be made early on and therefore not have the impact later on scheduling and delivery and cost and so forth. So, hey, Greg, maybe before we get into some questions, can we do throw up a quick poll here for the audience?
That there.
There we go.
Yeah, so if everyone can, just take, a few minutes, couple, 2, 3 minutes, and I think there are 3 questions here. That'll be great, and then we'll come back to these later. Um, Joe, you have your colleague Max, who is going to be doing a demo. I'll let you cue that up, right? So any initial, questions or, discussion between, Joe, you and Ed?
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking about, Ed, is perspective. All stakeholders have a slightly different perspective. Most have the same goals in mind, right? Which is to be efficient, especially with tax-funded projects and infrastructure, to be safe for sure, and deliver the highest quality that we can to the public. So, how do maybe from your perspective, the engineering perspective, how do utility risks, conflicts, damages affect mutual or municipal projects and operations as you guys are working with your client base?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, right, if you talk to a lot of DOTs or even, right, municipal agencies, it is a challenge, typically, right? They would almost all, right, tell you that moving utilities is a challenge, right? It takes a lot of coordination. Oftentimes it's the DOT, right, the local agency, along with, right, your utility owners, your contractor, right? And that's hard, right? I would argue that spending a lot of time with civil contractors, it's hard for them, right? Like they'd love to see it go faster and more efficiently. I think part of why I like the 4M platform and the approach is that you're starting with a data set that everybody can at least, right, work from. So even some of our locate partners that we work with today, they love using 4M because it does make planning, for instance, your locates, right, efficient. And so starting just there, right, you gain efficiencies because you're not going out there blind, right? You have a base map, right, that you can work against, which often does help quite a bit in terms of planning, right, before you go out in the field, which is where your costs are. I think the other thing that I hear from a lot of public works agencies is, they really have good, let's say, GIS data on a lot of their utilities today, but we've got some new challenges, right? A great example is fiber, right? There's fiber going in everywhere. So, right, that's going to be a new challenge that we're all dealing with. Just means right now we need more updates to our utility maps because they're changing more often, right? A lot of fiber being laid depending on, right, the state and area you're in, for example. But that's a big challenge, right? And, that's one issue. I think the other thing, right, that I always push for, my agency partners is that there's technology that exists today on, let's say, excavators, right, or heavy equipment that would actually allow us to avoid hitting a utility line, right? The problem we have today, right, is we don't have data that actually could drive that system, right? And that's part of our problem is that if we actually had a good utility network, right, map that we can rely on, right, which I'm hoping we do in the future, then all my friends in that contractor community, the safety factor goes way up, right? They are now much more protected from those utility strikes. The owner is protected from those utility strikes because the technology exists to stop, right, a machine or even the blade of the machine before it hits that particular asset. And you're going to see more, right, of that type of technology being released. A lot of contractors are very interested in using it, right? Typically, they have to model a lot of their own data, right, to be able to use it because they've got to go field verify before they can actually, right, use something like that in the field. But right over time, I think it'll get better, and that just becomes a standard, right? There's a lot of DOTs, a lot of public agencies that love that because they have a lot of friends, right, in the contractor community. They'd love to be able to, right, help them increase the safety factor. It just makes a lot of sense, right? So I think that's another big one that we hear from, right, our agencies. And I think the last piece that I hear from, right, especially the municipal clients, but DOTs as well, is, it's hard for them to keep all of their asset data up to date, right? And so having a baseline map, right, is a great way for them to look at where they might have changes or updates to be made, where their gaps are. I think that, if you look at the example of how we used 4M on projects by creating, right, and using the base map data from 4M, you end up with a better product through construction in terms of asset management and maintenance, right? You've got a standardized set of utility information, right? It's built out to standard sizes, right? Depths. And then as you're, right, doing utility locates or other activities in the field, as builting, right, those types of activities, the data gets better, right? And so a lot of our municipal clients that we talk to, they'd love to start, right, increasing the accuracy of their utility maps. They may have good maps today, but they're just missing some of that metadata, whether that's vertical depths, right, or diameters and sizing, or even ownership, right, of those particular utilities. They can always use, right, an enhancement of that data, and that's where I see that life cycle value of their information going up. Is right, the better that data gets, the better my planning, right, the better my execution of projects become. So it's a very tight circle that we need to, right, consider when it comes to the data, because I feel like if you want to get the most value out of 4M, you really should, pick a plan that you don't need to start with everything, but think about how you are going to use it, right, across the life cycle of your project planning.
Yeah, you made a lot of good points there. When it comes to utility, let's say records research, which I think underlying just about everything that you mentioned there, right, is this sort of concept of how record research is done today in the industry, and it's a challenge. One challenge is, as you described, is that information that's captured out in the field, oftentimes it takes maybe years and oftentimes maybe it never makes its way back into the official record, whether that's the GIS system or some sort of record database of that different entities might have, and therefore that becomes a challenge on the next project and the next project. Right, you don't get that sort of 360 loop feedback loop into your utility data model, whether it's in GIS or whatever. So one of the challenges that we are addressing with the use of technology, and it's pretty interesting how it's evolving and adapting so quickly, is that in the event that there are gaps in the data, whether it never made its way back to the record set or it never made its way back to the GIS platform, we started asking ourselves, could we create a model or an environment where we have trained the AI to complete the gaps in the record sets, which is something that we've achieved here at 4M. And that is, if I have a model for a particular infrastructure area or a project, or even at a city level, where I think the coverage level of the data that I'm able to gather through different records research and finding different records that are out there, if it's 70%, how can I apply the AI and get it to 90 or 95% complete, right? And that's one of the efforts that 4M is making, is helping the industry fulfill the gaps that are out there in incomplete records or records that just simply don't exist because they were never captured and never recorded out there. That's a big part of what we're attempting to do, is that coverage level along with the accuracy, right? Through some of the data science techniques, imagery science, object detection capabilities. When you apply all of that together, right, you begin the process of increasing the coverage for all sectors. It's not limited to just, say, water or sewer. We can do it in the telecom with the fiber that you mentioned earlier. And that is increase the bar of that baseline that we've been talking about, which is now you have access to a baseline. Over time is going to grow in comprehensiveness and the accuracy part of it.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that, and we'll see it from Max in the demo, but the fact that 4M, right, has added the above ground utility detection, right, that complements the underground mapping, it's made the product even easier to use, easier to verify, right, information, or see where you might have gaps or issues. So I agree. It's just made the workflow easier. So, and Greg, I think
Let,
you've got some polls and questions that we need to cover.
yeah, let's pause there for a minute, and if our backstage could bring up the utility poll results. I can read these, everyone can read them, but then Ed and Joe, I'll let you comment on these. What phases do you most commonly encounter utility issues? Um, all of the above: planning, design, construction, maintenance. Um, uh, any comments?
Yeah, I mean,
Does it,
I find it interesting, right? Like if you look at where folks are having issues, right, with utilities, it's across, right, different phases, which makes sense, right? I think when you talk to DOTs or public works groups, utilities are one of their largest, right, assets that they have to deal with, right, across, right, life cycle phases. So that doesn't surprise me. I think everybody's kind of felt the challenges and the pain of
right,
utility issues, right, depending on what group you are, right, within the department. So that makes a lot of sense, right? And that's,
yeah,
again, I think that gets back to the point of, the value of 4M is not just using it, right, in design and construction. You can use it in planning, right, in maintenance and asset management, right, across those life cycle activities. So I think that just reinforces what we're already saying, right?
right.
I think, right, when you look at the next question around, right, relying on utility owners for records, right? I think the majority, right, of infrastructure owners, road owners, transportation owners, they do, right, have to rely on their partners at the utility, right, networks to give them, right, information. And, it's funny, right? Because we work with a lot of energy and utility owners, right? Just like we work with transportation owners, and they have a similar challenge, right? They have to keep their utility maps up to date. They have
Mhm.
challenges, right, with utilities across all of those phases, right, of a life cycle of an asset. And they'd love, right, to be able to provide better data to the public works departments, to the DOT, to the contractor, right? That's something that they're actively working on, right? If you look at a lot of the, especially, right, let's say energy owners, right, utility owners today, where you've got, right, especially gas lines as an example with high risk utilities. This is a top of mind item right now, right? There, if you look at most states, right, and most big utility owners in the US, this is something they're focused on, right? Fire mitigation, right? There's lots of activity going on around, right? Utility data, right? Mapping my utilities, inventorying my utilities. And so I think that's one thing, right? That's really great. When you look at the other poll, right? They either rely on 811, right? Dig to mark, or right, locate vendors. That's great, right? Still means 4M can be used because, like we talked about, right? You can combine that 811 or that locate data with the mapping data. Just provides better, mapping information, right? Right before you get started on a project. So I think that is great, right? Feedback. Um, and then looking at the, where they're storing it, GIS, not a big surprise to me, right? Most of the owners I work with like to have this type of information in their GIS. I do think I'm seeing more state and local agencies start to host open access GIS platforms statewide. A lot of states are moving to that model, which I love because it is a collaborative effort, right? And the fact that you can have both a DOT or a municipal agency along with a utility all working around, for instance, a GIS portal, right, for utility map information, you're going to see more of that, right? And I've seen some states even move towards that model for their transportation information, not just utilities, right? So I think that's a trend you're going to continue to see. Um, a lot of folks have, physical or digital documents, but no platform today, right? As an example. So again, that's, you have a couple great options with 4M, right? You can leverage the 4M platform as is to help you with mapping, right? And combining that with some of the physical or digital documents you have today. You can also, right, combine some of that information together in GIS. Or as Joe said, right, they're working on processes where, we could potentially work with 4M and they could, right, look at your records, right, and see how that could help with some of the mapping, right, that they're doing. So I think these are great opportunities. None of these surprise me, right? So I guess, Joe, any comments on those for you?
Yeah, no, I would echo I think everything that you said in the first one there, right? I'd like to see a day or a time here in the next let's call it the 5 year sort of outlook where the 28% in construction where issues happen and the 26% in design, I'd like to see those mitigated and all shift up or forward in the process into the planning phase, into the sort of environmental feasibility study phase, right? Just on the premise that identifying those earlier on is always going to end up with better results on the stages down the workflow, including the construction and the maintenance. So I'd
Yep.
love to be able to take this same poll 5 years from now and see if we can make an impact and a shift on that. On the second question there, that one's kind of interesting to us because this is what I would say is sort of the status quo in the industry, right? Folks rely on utility records from owners, private utility locates, and subcontractors that go out there in the field and do the good work that they do to help identify and get that data into the decision making process. Of course, our friends and colleagues at the 811 centers who operate a critical function to ensure that safety is adhered to and all of that. But I think what we're going to see here again, looking 5 years into the future, is that there can be, right, with the work that 4M I think is doing, is there can be sort of another model out there, and I call it the living, breathing sort of infrastructure utility model, and that is a constantly updated in real time, almost in real time or near real time, utility model out there that lives in sort of the cloud environment, right? That anybody can get access to and pull that data down at any point in the project lifecycle, right? And so what I'm hoping that we can accomplish and deliver in the next 5 years is an additional data set, right, that we can add to kind of the status quo here. That's going to improve the process even more. Think about, 5 years from now, having a comprehensive cloud-based universal utility data set that you can get access to, and you can pull it down into your own systems, or you can pull it into the 4M platform. And now all of a sudden, we've got this idea of an industry standard that can be applied, and through the sort of the magic and the capabilities of the AI, right? We can be validated. It can be structured. It can have a taxonomy established with it. It can have all the metadata with an individual line that you're going to need. Who owns the line? What's the location? What's the depth? What's the material? When was it installed? All that critical information can be part of what we might call this utility infrastructure cloud. That to me represents kind of the direction of where we're going and where we'll end up in the next 5 years. So,
Great. Yeah, and Greg, I see we got some questions that I can
Well,
start covering. Or
before we do that, I want to go back to this first question and make an observation, and then
sure.
maybe, you, Ed, and you, Joe, can, comment on my observation. And, so this question is phrased as, in which phase do you most commonly encounter utility issues? And yeah, small plurality construction, is the highest. But my question is, where is the risk the greatest? The
Well,
yeah,
the potential risk of, delays and damage
yeah, I
and
mean,
things like
I mean, your risk is greatest in terms of costs, right, during construction because
right,
you've now
right.
mobilized, right?
Yeah,
So
right,
really what we, tend to advise is that, right, you really should be using this information pre-construction, right, or
right.
early design, right? Like,
Mhm.
because once you mobilize for construction, your costs go up. Every time
Right.
there's a delay, every time there's a field issue, right, you run
Yeah.
into a utility move, challenge. That costs you far more when you're in construction than it
Yeah.
does, right? It's part of this kind of an effort to go towards, right, virtual design and construction. Let's build
Right.
it virtually before we, right, mobilize and are incurring a daily, right, construction cost, which is
Hmm.
much higher, right?
yeah.
Right.
Even from I would just tag in there, Ed. Even from a like, if you look at it from a safety perspective, where is the highest risk? Clearly, as you're putting the bucket in the ground, as you're going into the ground,
Right.
that's where the highest risk from a safety perspective is. And really, in my view, that's what it's all about, right? It's how safe can we deliver the infrastructure out there. Yes, timing is important. Yes, cost efficiency is important. But really, it's safety that's that I would say that is the most critical. Right?
Yeah. Just another aspect of this, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but, my perception is that, this approach is all about minimizing damage to the utilities, damage to the infrastructure, through awareness, and then as part of pre-planning, rerouting utilities if that has to happen. I'm aware of a situation that happened here in Seattle. There's a freeway that connects Seattle with Boston. It's Interstate 90. And Boston was famous as they were finishing the eastern end of I-90 and all of the approaches and exit ramps for something called the Big Dig. And it went like, I don't know, 500% over budget. And we're talking about units of billions of dollars. And so about 10, 15 years ago, Seattle did their end of finishing I-90, something called the Big Dig, which involved a large two-deck, three-lane tunnel under the Seattle waterfront. And the way they did that was they hired a construction company that had this big German-made machine, an automatic excavating machine, and definitely didn't want to hit any utilities with this machine. They were all rerouted. But what happened was halfway into this process, the machine hit a previously unidentified piling. and it damaged the machine. It was out of operation for 9 months. There's all that delay. There's, who is responsible for the damage, not to the utility, but to the construction machine. So, I wonder if this comes up also, as a factor in thinking about ROI. I presume that construction companies, could put in claims if damage like that occurs, but, is that an
Yeah.
important factor also?
It
No,
is. I would say it's a super important factor. In fact, if you like, there's varying metrics out there, right? But in general, what you see is in construction claims, utilities are often at the root of
Mm,
about 80% of all
mhm.
construction claims that are out there, right? So again, just another, Greg, to your point, just another reason why comprehensive, more accurate data in the hands of the right people at the right time is a critical component of
Mm,
driving down some of the challenges that we see out there today around budget, around timing,
right.
around safety. All of that is what I would say is, in fact, I would go as far as to say that the underground is the largest challenge in infrastructure. Understanding and knowing what's in the underground is again, it is the number one challenge in delivering infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
The metrics show it out in damages, in claims, in challenges in design and changes that have to occur. It's utilities that are at the core of just about all of it.
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
hey, at this point, go ahead, Ed.
Well, I was just going to say your example in Seattle is perfect because the last example I showed everybody, right, with the video, they were actually using a right, TBM machine, a tunnel boring machine for right part of that project, and right catching a conflict with a pile right in early design costs you thousands of dollars, right, for a redesign. You don't catch that until construction, that's millions of dollars that it's
Right.
going to cost you. So
Right. Yeah.
it's a big difference, right, in
Right.
terms
Yeah.
of avoiding those risks.
Yeah. So, hey, I see we have some numbers or some questions in Q&A, and I'd encourage people to continue entering questions if you have them. But I think now, Joe, is this the time you wanted to introduce Max and do your demo?
Yeah, I think that would be great. We call it the after party. Max, if you want to jump on board with us, Max is sort of our senior sales engineer here at 4M. So why don't I do this, Max? I'll just turn it right over to you, and you want to give us a quick after party demo of the 4M platform, and so everybody can see the AI at work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
happy to.
welcome, Maximilian, Public Sector Solutions Engineer. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here. I will get my screen shared
And
and
I
we'll
think
get
you'll
this
probably answer
after
some of
party
these
started.
questions during the demo, Max, but we can cover the audience questions right after.
I think so. I was looking at a few of them. Let me make sure I pull them up on my side as well. But right as we start, we're in the platform. As long as you have a computer or tablet, you can log in through a password and then use through a web-based application, username, password, and then you'll be displayed and entered into the whole map of Foreham. We have a number of different states already pre-mapped, so you can instantly pull up the different data and the utility information right at the onset. So right now, we're zoomed in on Dallas, Texas, and we're going to go ahead and zoom in, create a project, and then see the utility data that comes up and start doing some interpretation, how this could help on the project and so forth. So we'll hit create new project. And then from there, what you're seeing first pop up is all of the estimated right of way with that is in the state of Texas. So when we're drawing it, this is the area we're pulling utility data for. A number of different ways you can draw your project. So we can do it through a polygon, or you can do it through linear. Now, if you're working inside of a GIS system or in Autodesk, Bentley, or any other platform that you can export a KML, KMZ, Shape, or any other file format, we can bring those in and you can just go ahead and upload your project boundary inside of that. But what we'll do, select the area, and then just double click. From there, we can see that we're doing about 207 acres off the get-go. Hit next. We'll do a quick name of this, put it in the folder so we can organize it, as well as we'll define what project phase we're doing. we're going to say this is a corridor, a conceptual study. We'll go ahead and say this is a road project and estimated budget 10 to 50 million in this case. And right off the bat, we'll hit view utility map. As we're viewing the utility map, this is where we've gone ahead and actively pre-mapped the whole state of Texas and a number of other states. And we're pulling all of that data forward for your project boundary. What we're also saying in the next 48 hours, we're going to go do our own QA/QC to ensure that we have any data that's in our pipeline that we're currently acquiring and can bring up for your project boundary. We're going to bring that forward. So to the question in the chat, how current is the data that you are you're seeing and it's being displayed? We are roughly 3 to 8 weeks from current data sources. So it depends on how active that public record is being updated. So as the data is getting pushed to the public record, we're able to absorb that, and then we're pulling that through our conflation process and then pushing that into that client-facing environment so you can pull that data up and forward. So it does take a little bit of time, but I would say that is very real time or near real time in terms of the construction life cycle. So we'll hit got it. And then the last piece that we have here is object detection. So when we're doing that QA/QC, that verification, validation of the data we're seeing and the lines that are being drawn underground against what we see above ground, the object detection allows us to understand and correlate is what we're seeing underground and what we're relying on makes sense to what the objects we're seeing on surface. So sewers, manholes, valves, light poles, inlets, outlets, all of those different pieces, as well as road marks. So we'll hit start detection. That takes 2 hours to run. I actually have this project already processed inside of another tab, so I'll move over to that. But right off the bat for this project area, you can see we have about 48 miles of total utility lines and 22 distinct owners pulled up. I'll step us over. And this is the same similar project area, but now this has fully run. So we've waited the 48 hours to get all the data to pull forward, as well as we've run that object detection. So we can see we have about 7,600 different objects that we're identifying. And you can see those all by the points. As we zoom in, we'll start seeing symbology. We'll start pulling forward and being able to understand what it is we're actually viewing. So I'm going to zoom in to this specific area of the project. And here we can start seeing all of the different layers. We can see those here. We can filter if needed be on overhead power, underground natural gas, and so forth. And we can start selecting that information and get an understanding of what's going on in this project area. We can select the line. We can see we have an underground natural gas line. This one's owned by Magellan Midstream Partners. And then from the attribution, we can see we weren't able to pull forward all of the attribution because we weren't able to find that in the public record. What is underground is unknown, and we're trying to uncover what that is and what we can find from that search. And so that's what we're pulling forward. The other piece is the data source. We provide 3 different data sources, ones that are public. So if we know the data source, we'll share that with you. Who is that record coming from? Private, due to T's and C's, we are trying to communicate that we cannot share who that is, but we are verifying that it is coming from a private source. And the third one is foreign, proprietary, or AI generated. And what we're communicating with that is that we've identified an object, say a fire hydrant, and we've identified a main water line. We know through engineering and logic and engineering judgment that fire hydrant and that main water line need to be connected. So we will draw in and connect that line. But because we're labeling it as foreign generated or AI generated, we want to communicate to you all that trust us, but go verify that this line is following that exact path that we're drawing. And it might have a jog, it might deviate a bit, but we want to communicate that there should be a line because said fire hydrant is connected to main water line, or gas valve that we've identified through the object detection is connected to that gas line. So that's one example. Here we can select and we can see we have underground potable water. We weren't able to have identified the utility owner in this case, but we were able to identify from our research that this is a 6-inch pipe, it's iron, and we have 2 utility sources inside of that. As we move around, this is where we can start seeing those different objects. So we can see the port, the fire hydrant, We can jump in, expand that. We can see where we are on site. We see we have 2 fire hydrants. We can see what other utilities. We have an ITS cabinet over there. We're connected to some power poles with telecommunication lines running on them and so forth. So we can get a good understanding of site conditions. What is it we're going to face and so forth. Here we can see there's yellow gas line, that road mark, but I'll move from that and actually zoom in on this road mark. And this piece is something that we just brought online, which is the ability to identify the 811 road marks. So someone has gone out into the field, actively used some type of geophysical measurement and tool to identify, and then spray painted a road mark on. And we've trained the AI to actually identify that and notify it. So here we can see the gas line, and then we can see the road mark. We can select the road mark, we can expand into it to get the street view, and we can see, okay, that is where that gas line is showing and where it has been measured. We can see what else are we going to face inside of this intersection, and then we can get an understanding of what's the deviation, what's the range from what we're, finding in the public record of where we believe that line to be and where it is being measured to. If you want, you can very easily measure that distance inside the platform. We can see it's roughly 6 feet or so. And this gives a good understanding of, okay, we bring this in early in planning, we can start doing alignments, pre-scoping and scoping to get an understanding. As Ed said, the earlier you bring this in, the easier it is to adjust your design, alter before it gets into 30, 60, 90, and out to construction. So we can start reducing costs, mitigating conflicts early, and so on. Lastly, if you need to get the data out of the system, you're working across platforms, you're working in Trimble, Esri, Bentley, and others, you can download the GIS file, you can download the CAD, we can push through a WFS connection over to any systems. So you can take all of the points, the lines, and the attribution and move that into the system that you need to do your design work in or do your daily work in. I'll pause, stop, see if there's any questions. I covered a bunch.
I have a question. Trying to imagine myself, here in Edmonds where I live, and, I'm working for Public Works and I want to utilize the system for a major project that we've got going. Does 4M provide, what does 4M provide in terms of end user support, like in terms of training or qualifying people on how most effectively to use this system? And, do you have like help desk for, questions and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. Up here, you can see we have the help functionality. And this is where you can come in, you can send us a message, and you'll have someone live on our side helping, working with you. You can dive into what we call Forum University, and it'll walk you through how object detection works, how to invite members, how to share data, how to create a project, and really work through all of that. As well, we have a very robust onboarding program that we work with our client success team to really help ensure that you are being brought on, trained properly, and know how to use the platform. So multiple ways to communicate us both in platform and then through the client success team as well.
Awesome. If this is the end of your demo, Maximilian,
Yeah.
so this might be a good time, with the three of you, on the stage here. Let's take a look at the online questions, and we'll go through them sequentially and wrap up our time that way. Oh, 16 questions. Wow. Um, so first from Joe C. For the Inner Kitty project, you talked about conflict detection. What's the best practice for utility conflict detection?
No, it's a great question. Thank you, Joe. Really, you could do it several different ways, right? So you're correct. The example I showed was within the Bentley environment. We do a ton of, right, Autodesk and Civil 3D. In fact, that's the majority of, right, our public works and municipal clients are in the Autodesk environment. So you can really, right, do the same thing in any environment, right? It could be Bentley, it could be Autodesk. Trimble has environments to do this in, right? There are several options, right? I think is the good news. I think part of it is just, what we do at WSB is we create a standard, right? So two things, right, that really make that conflict detection easier, faster, right? A little more automated is, right, one, we use the API feature, right, from 4M. We can pull files manually too, but we've actually, right, created an automated process to take 2D information and model it to 3D. That's part of why we can do it so quickly now, is that we're not manually, right, modeling all that utility data out. It's automated. So I highly, suggest you either partner with somebody that can help you do it, or it's not that hard to do, right? As an owner, right? That it's something you can quickly set up, right? And it's very beneficial because we do it on every project now. That's also, for instance, where we apply standard sizes, depths, right? Depending on, right, the utility standards, right, that are out there. So it gives you a really good start and 3D baseline utility map. And then we always do our designs in 3D, right? And so whether that's Bentley, Autodesk, right? We PLS CAD for energy customers, right? Lots of different tools for design out there. We still model that in 3D, right? Whether you're a transportation owner or a energy owner, right? Once we have those two data sets modeled, right, to a standard, then the conflict or clash detection becomes easier. And then, right, to Joe's question, you could use a tool like Navis, right, which is an Autodesk, conflict tool. Trimble's got Trimble Connect, which is easy to use. You can bring Autodesk, Bentley, right, W4M data into the Trimble environment. Same with Bentley, right? We use Synchro. Part of why we use the Bentley environment is it does have good integration of schedule and phasing. So it's a unique differentiator versus some of the other, right, platforms out there. That really helps us look at the schedule and phasing, especially with your contractors. But you don't need to, right? Part of it is you don't need to have any particular technology, right? To me, it always starts with good data, right? So if you can get your design into a standard 3D format, if you can get the 4M data into a standard 3D format, then you have lots of options for tools for clash detection. I wouldn't say it's automatic, Joe, but it's much easier, right? And a good example is we're doing another project in Houston. We're helping a subcontractor there because they needed help with modeling in 3D, right? Both utilities and the design. And that's part of a larger BIM, right, coordination effort with the GC. And they are using some automated tools. So we deliver, for instance, in that case, IFC formatted files. And that does help them automate more of the clash detection. And they're using, I can't remember which tool they're using, another one of the platforms out there for clash detection. But I think that's the advantage, Joe, is you're not locked into any one environment. You can really take this approach with any, right, design tool using the 4M data. So, happy to give you more details, right? Just reach out after this and we could have a little more discussion on it. But let's jump to the next one, Greg.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm going to lump these next two questions together. One from Thano: is the 4M data accurate? When you find errors, does 4M update the maps? Do you submit as-built to 4M? And Richard said, how does 4M gather the data? So those two seem to go together. Who wants to respond?
Yeah, let
Yeah,
me I'll take a stab at that
yeah,
one.
you go ahead, Joe, and I'll add to it.
Yeah. So we view accuracy in a very particular way, right? And that is that accuracy is a journey that the data goes through, and it's in partnership with the engineering firms that we work with. It's in partnership with the survey firms that we work with and the field validation folks that are out there. We think it's critically important that accurate we work on accuracy as we get closer and closer to putting that bucket in the ground, because that's where the risk is the most. So our baseline, we like to say we're within a few feet in the baseline foundation layer. And then over time, our goal is to work with all of those folks. So as they are pinpointing accuracy, even out in the field with designation and locating, that information is fed back into the 4M platform, and it's a continually updating process. That's how we view it.
Okay. Ed, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, right, I've been with 4M since the very early days, 4 years ago. I actually worked with them in one of the first DOTs that wanted to try out 4M information. What I would tell you is they've done a great job of gathering the data, right? I think part of the advantage of AI is that we can access a lot of public records, right? So if to Richard's question, a lot of the data is just public, right, records. It could be GIS information, it could be, right, open plan sheets and drawings. That's the advantage of AI, right? Is it can take those massive, right, publicly available data sets, it can process them all, right? They conflate them, meaning bring them all together, right? Do comparisons against, right, different sources. They use satellite imagery, right? So think about anything above ground, right, can be, you can go to satellite imagery like Google Maps. You can look at what's above ground, right, already, right, that's out there today. It's getting better even, right? If you look at a lot of the imagery providers, they're getting more accurate, right, more detailed, higher resolution. So, to me, it's going to continue to improve, right? And yes, right, we're having discussions with Forum on as-builts. I think a lot of infrastructure owners are interested in how could I take my as-builts, right, into a process to continually update. So it's a great opportunity, right? And you do want to build that type of loop. So I think Richard and Thano, you guys are thinking the right way, right? I would tell you, right, for the DOTs or public agencies I've talked to in terms of accuracy, it's always helped them, right? I've never found an owner, right, in the infrastructure, transportation, or energy space that would tell you, oh, the 4M maps aren't, right, speeding my process up or providing a better early look, right? It's mapping grade, so you do need to understand it, right? That's part of why we said you don't do away with 811 or locates, but the map sure helps you, right? When you're looking at your locate data and your 811 info to know, right, like how complete is this map, right? So that's the approach we take today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I,
would just tag in just to close this one out, right? How does 4M gather the data? Well, that's where sort of the technology comes into play. To the tune of today, we have tens and tens of millions of data records that we have conflated into the platform. And then part of the process is this geolocation, automatic geolocation of the individual line work that we extract out of those record sets. And to the extent, and this speaks to the accuracy, to the extent that we can create a constellation of the line work and then the visual imagery evidence that gives us the ability to on our platform begin to move lines around when we see the evidence of where those lines that have been extracted out of those utility records should be. Max showed you a great example of that, right? It was about 6 feet off in that specific gas example, but we found evidence that showed it was over. And that is the key to applying the engineering logic and saying, okay, move that line over a little bit to coincide with the physical evidence out in the field that we see.
let's see. Well, this question, when, oh no, uh, oh, here. If I'm a client, Ethan, if I'm a client and I need to update the data based on latest findings, do I do that myself or do I need support from 4M, to do that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so
I'll let Forum answer and I can add to it. So,
yeah, well, there's a couple of things going on, right? We're conflating all this data together and we're providing it for you. But surely you have information that can be very, very valuable and enrich the database that you're using on your individual projects. So there's two different models that we're approaching. One is give us all the data, right? And we can process it into the platform itself. And then the other model that we're pursuing is giving you the tool sets and the ability through integrations and other to make updates to the data set. Or we have a concept that we're working on right now called bring your own data, which is we know you have data records out there. Why not put those to use? Allow you to upload those right into the platform yourself, and they will process just like the data that we process on our side and be added to your map. So in our view, that common data environment is the most enriched environment, the most comprehensive environment that we can put together or provide you by working together and allowing you to bring your own data into the platform.
Great.
yeah. Yeah. And I would say, you really have flexibility, right? Using 4M. You don't necessarily need support from 4M to update the 3D models, right? You can do that on your own. A lot of owners using 4M will update their GIS maps, right? They don't need 4M support to do that. They just need access to 4M to do it. But Joe's right, right? If you really want to, right, update the maps within the 4M platform, that's where you would want their support, right, to set up that process, like Joe said, of okay, what data do you want to provide, right, to then right process those updates. So I think that's the nice part is it gives you the flexibility as a client where, right, you can take the data, do what you need to in design, do what you need to in GIS. And then if you want to collaborate with them on right enhancing the maps within the platform, then that's also an opportunity. So I think right that kind of answers Ethan's question.
Yeah, I would go one step beyond that, and that's why we have good partners like Ed and WSB, right? Because they have become experts on the platform. And those are the types of services you might want to engage WSB on and work together, right? It doesn't necessarily have to come directly through us.
Yeah, we're always happy to help, right? And we always try to teach our clients and educate them first, right? So they can understand what would it take, right, to do something.
Got it. So here's a question from Chao Lu. How do you use AI to perform clash detection problems? And can you explain further how you do it?
It's a great question, Chow. We're just starting this, is what I would tell you. But it does start with the data, right? So what I was mentioning earlier about once you've, let's say, modeled the 4M utility maps and you have your 3D design in a single environment, right? Again, doesn't matter what environment, it could be Bentley, Autodesk, Trimble. That's Chow where we're then leveraging an AI agent to look for clash detections, right? And that's just simply a geospatial, right, search. So we typically are, right, asking it to look for, right, different 3D objects that may, right, basically, be within the same geospatial reference point, right? So that's the advantage of having all that data in a single environment, Chow, is now I can apply some AI, right, to that data set. And because it is standardized, right, I'm working off, let's say, a standardized coordinate system. I can, ask it questions like, tell me all the objects, right, or assets, right, within that data set that may have a conflict and, right, sit within the same space. So that's one really good example that we're going after, right, Chow? And I think, right, when I talk to a lot of even public agencies, they're starting to think about, right, that possibility as well, because the data's there, right? It's now a matter of training up an agent, right, to do what you need it to do in terms of that search, right, and analysis. So very possible. Be happy to, right, do a future webinar on that topic. We're just very early because we've, right, just gotten the data sets ready to start training up an AI agent to look at it. But great question.
So Gina Hartman asked a question. Historically, the biggest challenge in damage prevention is the unwillingness of various utilities and private locating companies to share info. How are you convincing them to share their data with you, and or are you waiting until the data becomes publicly available?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
it's
good
there's
question.
a couple ways to answer that question. One is yes, we are collecting that data when it becomes publicly available. But here's the interesting piece of that, right? It is oftentimes we think about that utility data as let's say protected data or data that is not shared for different types of reasons. But the reality is the majority of the data is available through public record documentation, right? It's just a matter of how do you, at scale, extract it out of multiple data sources and get it into an environment where it can make sense, right? So our primary method today is that public availability of that, even the privately held assets that are out there. That's one. Number two is the technology is now allowing us to draw the networks without even having to have the records themselves. So pretty soon, for example, we're going to be able to provide the gas network in a city
Hmm.
without having access to any of the records because we can see all the constellation of evidence and train the algorithms then to begin to draw the networks themselves. And then lastly, I would say we prefer in an environment where we are working directly with the utility owner that they be open to the conversation of sharing that information. Why would they do that? Well, one is we know that there's challenges that utility owners have with their records. We can identify those gaps for them using the imagery science capabilities that we have, and then provide back to them an updated or an enriched network map for them, improving their own network data along the way. So those are the three areas that we sort of focus on from a records perspective.
Got it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And I would just add, I mean, Gina nailed it, right? It is a challenge in the industry today. But I think what's helping, right, and what's changing the industry is it's not really a choice anymore, right? The technology is surpassing you as a
mhm.
utility owner, right, as an example, and the data is becoming available, right? So you're either going to participate or not. And if you're not participating, your business and your life gets harder, right? Is really what it comes down to. I
I would
also,
guess, yeah, no,
yeah.
go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, and I would also tell you, right, the trend I mentioned before about statewide data access, right, for transportation owners, for utility owners, that's a trend that you're going to see continue. It's not going to go the other way, right?
Right.
And so I think there's a lot more pressure, right, on the utility companies to inventory their utility assets, have good utility maps. I can tell you, right, from the ones that we work with, right, in multiple states today, this is top of mind for them, right? And they are looking at 4M, right, to help them. I think the other thing that Joe and the 4M team have done a good job on is we can also offer, right, those utility owners some extra, right, capabilities around who's accessing my data, right? So a lot of times the utility owners want to know, right, like who is it, a design engineer, a contractor, right, another owner? They don't really have good info, right, to put this together today. So I think this is a better approach for them, right? They're going to know who's requesting data, what data is being requested, where is it being requested. And Joe's even looked at, right, how do we empower some of those utility owners to control access to their data? Because it is their, right, utility network. So I think the 4M team has done a great job of, let's say, easing the fears, right, that a lot of the utilities have. And that's important, right? We want them to be a part of this process. So.
Yeah, we've definitely seen sort of let's say the nature of willingness to share begin to come down a little bit, and that is good signs that we're doing something right. So we're really encouraged at what we're hearing and what we're seeing out there.
Okay, Chow Lu had two more entries here, but I think this person was just clarifying the earlier
Yeah,
question.
I could talk to him. I think Chow, we answered your questions. So,
Yeah,
put any other questions you might have right
right,
into it. Um, and we'll answer that. But I think we did answer those right in terms of AI and clash detection.
right.
So I think those are good. I think we could jump to Amanda's question, which is a
Yeah.
good one. So
Okay. So do you ever work with private consultants directly for design if the public agency they are working with does not have sufficient utility data resources instead of having a traditional surveying sub consultant? 4M could 4M be used for to better map utilities?
Yeah, I
yeah,
think within that question, there's probably a couple of questions, right? One is who do we work with? And we're open to working with just about anybody that has a need out there for, again, access to comprehensive utility data. And for those organizations, I'll give you a quick sort of story. We mapped a small town in Indiana using the technology. We mapped the entire footprint of the town. It was a small town and because they had zero utility records and zero systems in place in order for them to do the asset management. Not like they were doing a bunch of infrastructure work, but they didn't even have an inventory of what was within their city. And so our approach was the ability to provide them with a utility map for their entire city. And we gave that to them, right? So that's an example where there's a challenge. There's a resources constraints out there, but because we have developed the ability to do it pretty efficiently, it was not a cost impact for us, and we provided them with sort of a utility map of their entire city, right? So that's an example of the kinds of things that we can do when there's resource challenges or they don't have any data. We can bring them from zero to at least a baseline within their jurisdiction. So
I want to just do a check-in. We've got about 10 minutes before the advertised end of this webinar. And apparently we have an unusually large number of questions. So just for attendees to validate that, if we don't get to all of them live, that the presenters will appropriately answer each question, that you'll be able to reference afterwards. So let's try to do a couple more questions and
yeah.
then, we can have some wrap-up remarks.
Greg,
Uh,
let me go back to Amanda's question really
yeah.
quick before we move on there, because I want to address working with traditional surveying subconsultants. Our model is what we call build better together. So it is our preference to work with and find survey and subconsultants that are interested in determining and figuring out a way to use the 4M data as a part of their workflows and a part of their processes. We think it's inevitable that the data set is going to be part of the future, and let's find how to work together today.
Okay. From Joe, does 4M Analytics have the capability to incorporate as-built drawings, provide feedback to utility owners?
We do. And so as-built drawings is a very common data source that we find out in the public sector, and we process as-built drawings. If the question is at the end of a project, can 4M produce an as-built? The short answer is we will be able to produce an as-built, but we've got some work to do before we get there. We're not quite there as a deliverable. But certainly delivering a sort of automated as-built at the end of a project is something that we've discussed as a part of our agentic workflow capabilities.
Okay. From Richard Caprio, what is the public record for communication, gas, water data? These seem to be critical infrastructure and aren't shared outside the utility.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, I mean, Joe, you could cover this, but I think one of the things we've seen with 4M is it actually does a great job of looking at transportation projects, right, that involve the communication, gas, water data. So that's
Got it.
one way, right, to access a lot of that info. It's one of the better ways. You've got the above ground, right, object detection for some of those assets, right, that help tie into the maps is another, right, example of what's publicly available. I mean, Joe, you and Max can probably expand on, right, how you're also going after some of those, right, utilities as well.
Yeah, there's bid packages out there, believe it or not, right, that have sort of the communication and the gas line work
Mm,
that are in there as a part of a records research project that was done previously or historically. Not only is there one, but there are millions of bid packages out there with that line work that's in there. And another area is permit, right? So you can get access to permit data that has
mm,
that information in there as well. I will say it's not uncommon for us to run into an environment where on an individual project, it's not the lack of data that we have to deal with. It's too much data that we have to
mm,
deal with. In other words, that gas line that we've identified, not only have we identified it in one record source, but eight other record sources might have that same gas line recorded in it, and all of them conflict on the
mm,
location. So
mm.
we have to make the determination as a part of an algorithm that we've developed to determine what is the most probable location using the evidence that we have. So oftentimes it's not a lack of information or data, it's too much information or data that we have to sort of work our way through.
So when you're delivering, data to clients or construction companies, does the 4M data, include metadata? So if, there's a major line that I'm concerned of or, hazardous material, that I can get, some feeling of where that came from and, like a confidence level.
It is, yeah. And so we provide the record source to the individual users so they can see sources of where the information came from. And so that's one way, in addition to all the other metadata, excuse me, metadata that we collect on the individual line. As Max was clicking on a line, it opened up that little dialog box, right? So we have the owner, we have the year it was installed, we have the material, we sometimes we have the depth and other related metadata. It's not 100% because simply stated, right, the data is not complete 100% from a metadata perspective, but chances are pretty good. We have a good starting point of metadata that you can use.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, and I think we're not going to get through all of these questions. And honestly, I had other questions for the panelists also. But Joe and Ed, Max, do you want to make any final remarks?
No, I think this has been great, right? As you said, we'll go through all the questions that the audience has put forth, and we'll send those out to the group, right? So you guys have some responses from us. I see some great questions in there. Sorry we can't get to them all, but we're really here to help, right? And that's part of why we do these webinars is to educate and help the industry. So glad to be here, and thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody for participating. Greg, for hosting, thank you. And Ed, thanks to you as well. So we appreciate it very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.